Welcome to my ramblings. This one is about code checking authority. Really don't know what to title it. It covers a lot of area. Starts with a couple of things I talked about, how basis of ratings and how you have to understand how equipment is rated to apply it, and talked a little bit about the NEC. And I want to touch on something. Um, you know, Deciding how much extra money to spend on a short circuit rating of a breaker or a panel. No, we don't hire the contractor to make those decisions. That's an owner decision. If he wants to spend this much money, so he gets more life out of a circuit breaker, that's extremely complex analysis because you really don't know how many times a circuit breaker is going to see a short circuit, and and where those short circuits are going to occur. So there's a lot of factors to take into account, and that's an owner's risk. That's something that an owner takes on when he hires somebody. And so, who makes the decision whether to just stick to the NEC or not? Well, whether you're a civilian employee, and this doesn't really apply to contractors, it's beyond the scope of this. you know, or whether you're one of the warfighters, or whether you're within the facility function of the military. Well, let's keep it to the Navy. All the way up, you trace up high enough in the chain, and we all have an admiral that sits up there somewhere, and there's a lot of discussions. Sometimes you hear people, and when you first hear about all this stuff, um, you know, they kind of describe these discussions. OSHA shouldn't apply. OSHA should apply. Why the hell should OSHA have any say about how we do stuff? And really, it's a moot point because just like the Army, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, you know, the very tops of these organizations have issued memoranda stating that we will comply with OSHA, we will comply with the NEC, we will comply with various other standards and stuff. So it's commands issued, directives issued by the various highest levels in these organizations. And I even saw a document once that was signed by the Secretary of Defense saying, that all the various branches will comply with this. And, OSHA is a workplace standard, so it doesn't apply to the battlefield. Obviously, it's way beyond anything I would know about as to describe, but I'm sure they have methodologies and strategies. But in the workplace, on the base, you know, whether it's a sailor or a function that a civilian performs, all the facilities are, you know, are meant to be designed, or ordered to be designed, if you want to put it that way, to comply with OSHA and to comply with, not just the NEC but other codes. But as a student employee working in one of the Navy's construction offices that administered construction contracts, you learn a hell of a lot, just an awesome lot about facilities and a lot of laws and contracts and stuff like that. Doesn't make me an expert on contracts. Doesn't make me by any means a legal expert. Doesn't qualify me for paralegal or anything like that. One of the biggest pitfalls is you really don't learn much about construction, and with the courses I was studying, it, but you do learn a lot about federal acquisition regulations. Learn about how the structure of specifications are. They call for various submittals. That's one of the things that the Navy does to protect its interests is it requires submittals. It requires testing and inspection. And back then, it was a transition. We had conreps. No, they weren't representatives of the contractor. They were representatives of the contract on the government side, and they actually went out and did inspections, and that was the old way of doing it. Then they came up with the quality assurance, where part of the money, well, contractors bid on a project, but part of their bid includes hiring an independent organization to do all the inspection, and then our inspectors and sometimes the engineers. The engineers were typically the construction contract administrators, would look at that quality assurance plan and make sure that the records were being kept of the inspections that were made and stuff. Um, and sometimes, if in the design of the project, if either by the judgment of the people that designed the project or in the judgment of NAFAC criteria, um, things would actually require government inspection. But so does is the federal government the code checking authority on things that on contracts that engineers are hired to provide designs and reports for, or that construction contractors are hired to provide projects for? Is it the contractor's decision, or the engineer that we hire's decision to use, to just decide what level of short circuit current? Well, I'm not, this can't be legal advice, but let's stick to the code checking thing. If IBM hired an engineer to do and an architect to do some design work, those people won't go to IBM and say, okay, now do my code checking. Usually in the design and construction process, it goes to states and counties and they do code checking. Why? Because they're the instrument of government who are responsible for public safety and stuff. And they want to make sure that the buildings and stuff that go up in the areas that lie within their boundaries, aren't going to present a safety hazard to the people that use them. And so, many of them have building codes that might be slightly modified from national building codes. They adopt them legally, and then they adopt code checking and inspection statutes and stuff. And so these people, in order, to actually be able to build a project for IBM, the state and local laws require code checks and safety and various types of construction inspections and stuff. If these guys went to IBM and said, okay, code check this for us and make sure you inspect this work for us, IBM would tell them, get the hell out of town. And that's sort of the relationship the federal government has with their engineers and construction contractors, except usually there isn't a state or local thing that does their code checks and inspections. So when the government's doing inspections, it's not doing it from a perspective of public safety. It's doing it from the perspective of, well, this is how the Navy looks at it after its interests. We want to make sure that we're getting what we asked for, and that we want what we paid for, I guess. And we don't. So by the same token, with engineering contracts, we don't do their code checking for them. When they submit something to us, we expect it to be fully code compliant stuff. And when we did our reviews, and a lot of people argue over the use of the word reviews, but when I did my first rotation, it was in the utilities engineering department. That was actually my target position. They were called reviews, and what we did was we checked for scope of work, and then we have all kinds of fixed set of parts. Normally, the government can't order proprietary, but there are things where there's leeway, like if we use this type and style of fuse in this type and style of application, we can specify that. I don't think we necessarily always specify any one particular manufacturer, although I think in some cases, because of vast differences in the need to have a standard set of maintenance practices, there were instances, I think, where we might have. Private industry, they use specific manufacturers all the time, but in the government, the federal acquisition regulations strictly limit the ability to do that. So we're not the code checking authority, but we did do. So we did primarily we were concerned with, did it meet scope of work? Did it meet the construction criteria that we have? If you contracted with IBM, they would probably have their own facility standards that perhaps expanded on the NEC, and whatever other design reliability requirements they have, that would be in their design criteria and construction criteria. The Navy, just like any place else, has their own set of criteria and stuff that they expect the contractors and the designers to adhere to. And so a lot of the checking we would do is, does it meet this criteria that we have laid out? And that was made a part of the contract. Sometimes we check code, but we weren't, at least I at the time, very limited knowledge of the code, of the various codes, and so if we knew something, we might spot check it just as a double check. Yeah, these guys look like they're doing a code check, but we weren't the code authority, so to speak. We were paying these guys, money to provide a product and service, and so we expected them to make sure that it met codes. And I'm really running out of time. I just wanted to reemphasize there's a lot of things that fall under the owner's responsibility and the owner's risk. And I was reading a lot of magazines back then, and they had articles by lawyers and stuff, and you had to watch out. A lot of owners. I don't think the Navy was in this category, because it's they would try to shift their business risk onto the A&E. And so one of the things they advised you to look out for was contracts that said, this is a satisfaction contract. I mean, theoretically, it could string you along for the rest of your life, calling for more and more work or refinements, so to speak, until they were technically satisfied, until they said they were satisfied. And that's not the normal contract. And I'll ramble about this. I hadn't really intended to include this stuff in the book, but I might now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode. See you soon.